it's Ann Margaret with Raise the Vibration. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm back with another author interview. Man, I don't even know where we are in this process, but I'm so excited to introduce one of the authors for the summer section of the book, Raise the Vibration, a weekly guide for alchemizing the human experience. I have Marina Vernovsky. So thank you so much for being here with me. I'm so excited to introduce people to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I know there's probably a little slight delay too, so we'll deal with it. So I'm so excited that she's here with us. I finally have the book, so I can show your story right here, Unburden. Marina, I just want to introduce a little bit about you, and then I want you to talk about yourself a bit. She grew up in Chicago. She has a background in cultural and linguistic anthropology, film, and media theory. And she's fascinated with just observing life, like observing people, watching people. People watching is one of my favorite things to do too, Marina. But she spent time in New York City, California, Senegal, India, and is now spinning circles in the northeast of the U.S. So I want you to just kind of talk to us a little bit about you. Before you do that, I found you. I feel like our paths crossed because of your brother, right?
Yeah, and his partner.
Right, and Melissa, his partner,
Melissa. Yeah. And I remember her mentioning you, and it was so many years ago now. And then I walked into your studio in our neighborhood in Astoria, in Queens, in New York, and it was maybe the best yoga class I've ever had. And I was like, wow, she's a great teacher.
Oh my goodness.
You don't come across that often, someone who actually seems to know what they're doing instead of like enacting this facade of purporting anything. So it was amazing. And then what was interesting is after that class, I realized there was a woman with whom I went to college that I hadn't seen since I graduated. We just happened to run into each other in your class. So it was all, quite.
The kismet, the synchronicities. I love hearing about that. That's so fun. That's so fun. Well, you know what? I think it's important with anything that we do, we channel it through our own authenticity. And I didn't even realize that. I thank you so much for that acknowledgement. And it's crazy because I met Eddie through Melissa as well. And Melissa used to perform massage at our yoga studio and spa there in New York. Before she started her own practice, not before she started her own practice, she practiced in California and then came, but before she started her own brick and mortar place as well. And I think you know this. I'm not sure if you know this or not, but I met Eddie because I was like, hey, I'm recording a video for a music video for one of my songs on my new album, and I need a boyfriend. I need a guy to play my boyfriend. That's breaking up with me. I did have a happy ending at the end of the song. I did end up with a different person, but I thought, maybe I should make the guy at the end my husband, Anthony. So he played my happy, ending person that I was able to walk into the sunset with. But Eddie,
my brother was just the asshole in the middle of the song. Okay.
Totally. The gorgeous ass who at the beginning of the song breaks up with me, and I'm like, what? Because of course it's a breakup song, So he was so awesome. He just jumped into that, and we had a blast. So it was very, very fun. So that's how I end up also connecting with you as well, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So, well, tell us a little bit more about you, about yourself.
Well, I feel like that bio summed things up quite efficiently. I was raised by immigrants. They came from the former Soviet Union. So I grew up speaking Russian, and then I started learning English when I went to school. And I have this vivid memory, and I don't know how accurate it is, but I was sitting under a table in preschool watching a bunch of kids talking to each other from somewhere. They were a little bit further away from me, and I didn't know what they were saying. And then I think that slowly just morphed into me playing with the English language so much. Maybe there's got to be some connection, right? I come from not knowing this language at all to messing around with it as best I can, mostly for my own enjoyment. You know, I feel like most people never really know what I'm talking about. They're like, okay,
Well, language is so powerful, and when we have an understanding of how to use it, everything gets better. Like we're able to communicate in our relationships. You're a gorgeous writer. I can't wait for people to read your story because it's such a unique way of delivering. I'm so glad you started in that way because I mean, you said sitting under a desk when you're, earlier memories, observing people talking to each other and then wanting to master that language. Like what a core memory for you.
Yeah, and again, who knows how true it is? Maybe it's just an amalgam of a bunch of different memories at that point in my life, but it, there's that feeling of being an outsider. There's that feeling of searching for some secure place where no one else can see me and only I can see everyone else. And I
Yeah.
still like search for that as, a supposed adult. I'm just constantly wishing that no one can see me so that I can freely watch, and analyze just again for
Yeah.
my own enjoyment.
Well, in your own experience too, that's such an interesting thing. I mean, you just address so many incredible aspects of being human. Is that so many times like we are not ourselves because we're being watched. I know, like doing like a Instagram live or whatever I'm doing right now. Like it took me a while to kind of be present with the person I'm talking to when I'm doing these dual lives because you're like, oh my God, how is my hair okay? Like, oh, look at my eye makeup running. Like, to be observed changes everything. We know that in quantum physics, the second there's an observation, everything changes. We're the same way. Like we're the same way when we're being watched. Like it's the most critical time to actually be ourselves and to be free in that human observation, that human experience.
Yeah. There's this concept. I came across it, I think, in school at some point, but that everything is a performance. To whatever extent you're always performing somehow, even with yourself
Mm,
or even to yourself
mm,
sometimes. When I came across that idea, it was almost paralyzing because, not to that extent, but you just become so aware sometimes. It's like when you start thinking about your heart beating, it starts to do something that it wasn't doing when you weren't paying attention to it. Like you just mentioned, in theoretical physics too. I think that idea is ubiquitous. And so then the tricky part then is figuring out what of that is genuine, and maybe all of it is. Maybe those different parts of you that are coming out when you're interacting with each person or each like aspect of your environment, those are genuine parts of you, and they're for some reason just pulled out to the front, to the forefront in those moments.
yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, no, this is amazing because I have a background in theater and music, and I still obviously perform music and write, but the background I had in theater taught me so much about archetypes, and Shakespeare is my favorite. The classics are my favorite. Greeks and the Grecian archetypes and the understanding of the aspects of our personality, and then the Jungian archetype portrayal of our human dynamics and how to understand ourselves. And that's all through my methodology of what I help to kind of understand how to heal parts of myself or to make peace with parts of my experience. And that's what I do to coach people now. That's how I help people in my own personal way of just the way that worked for me. It's not going to work for everybody, but that's what I found that really works. And Shakespeare said all the world's a stage and we're just but players, we're playing our parts. And if we don't acknowledge that, and I get that the paralyzing aspect of that, because you're like, oh my God, wait a minute. So is there ever an authentic moment? Like, is there ever an authentic moment? And on the Greek, that's why on the Parthenon, it's like, know thyself is the first thing. Like, you want to come here for answers? Know thyself. And the dimensions of ourselves, like the multi-dimensional aspects of who we are and how we're seen and how we want to be seen, I feel is so much about the richness, encapsulates the richness of your story, because your story is so beautiful in this book. It really talks about like how you're wanting to be seen in this moment of vulnerability. And and the frustrating parts about our experiences not being seen for how we want to be seen, and not, or maybe not seeing others for how they want to be seen. And and the relationship, that how we're seeing ourselves, it being the most important aspect of that. So I know I mean, I feel like you and I could kind of talk a lot. You know, we haven't really had the chance to do that, so I'm really psyched to be having this conversation with you.
Right.
And those who are watching on Instagram are like, you're talking to yourself, dude. I'm actually having a conversation. I'm having a conversation with Marina. She's one of the book authors, but she doesn't have an Instagram account because that's brilliant. So she's
I
zooming
missed
with
the
me.
boat.
Yeah, yeah. So I almost missed the boat on that too. I was a little late in the game. So if you're listening on Instagram and you're not seeing her face, you can watch it and the replay on YouTube or Facebook. But um, I want you to talk about your story. Like, why did you write this story? Because we're talking about how things change when we observe them, whether it be ourselves or other people, and all of that. And I love this story because it's so beautifully written, so uniquely written. Um, and it talks about time that you spent in West Africa, I believe, uh,
Yeah, in Senegal.
in Senegal. So just tell us a little bit about that experience and why you chose this story of any other story of resilience in your life.
Oh man. um, so when you had asked for a contribution to your magnificent project, I started writing the way I seem to have developed a habit of writing, in just the most flowery way, using as many complicated metaphors as possible, which is kind of what I was talking about with, I'm just like playing with the English language as much as I can, but then that didn't feel honest, in the sense that this was actually going to be read by someone. It was just a thought exercise for me. It was for the sake of an audience. And in my...
Oh, I lost you. Say that again. Oh, hold on one second. I'm not hearing you.
all over this like product of creation, because you make something, you have certain intentions for it, but then it's released once it's made, or once the deadline has come. It is
I know that
released.
feeling.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You can't edit anything anymore. The performance is over, and
It's out
that
there.
thing, right, it is at the mercy of everyone who comes into contact with it. You have nothing to do with it anymore. And so with that in mind, I really, and this is after my brother chiding me so many times, he's like, just use the easiest words you can possibly think of. And so I kept writing a sentence, deleting, and I kept doing that over and over until this moment, I guess, just kind of came to me, this memory of my, it ended up being 6 months in that village.
In
And
Senegal.
in Senegal. And it's, for some reason, seemed to epitomize something that was so crucial to me, which maybe was like acceptance, or letting go of control of how other people saw me, just being okay where I was and what I was doing, and letting other people do their own thing, instead of being like, no, this is, you need to think of me this way, you need to see me this way, you need to interact with me this way, or my feelings are going to get hurt. I was basically just being a big baby, and I still am. And reading through that story is an awesome reminder of how you can be a baby. It's okay. You can totally be a baby. You can be whatever comes out at that moment, and other people will just have to react or respond as they will. And that's okay. That's totally fine. Another aspect of that was something that has been a big part of my life for a while now, which is physical exercise, I guess, or just physical ability.
Yeah.
In general. And so when I was living in New York for almost 2 years, when we first came across each other, I got very into working out and climbing and boxing. And then I left for India. I was going to this ashram where there were no weights, there were no barbells, there were no climbing walls. And I had that had become such a big part of my life, and I guess such a big part of like how I saw myself, that I was panicking. And so I was doing pull-ups on the grates of the windows of this room where I was staying in this ashram, and my roommate was calling me in Spanish brutita because she was from Spain. She was like, "You're insane." You know, I was running sprints on the roof of the dorm building where I lived and making my own climbing walls. And at some point that culminated after maybe a month or so in like the most severe diaphragmatic cramping I'd ever experienced. It was crippling. So for almost an entire day, every couple minutes or so, I would just have this cramping and I wouldn't be able to do anything. I'd have to curl up into fetal position of some sort. And I was talking to someone who had been at this ashram for years, and he was like, you're not eating the same as you were when you were able to do the physical stuff that you want to keep doing. You know, you don't have, it's not the same climate. It's not the same place. You don't have the same schedule. Everything's different. So just give it up. I'm paraphrasing. He was much more magnanimous with his phrasing. But, he's like, just get over it, you know, and let this place do what it will with you. And that was incredible. And I did. And I felt perfect after my time at this ashram. And then they kicked us out. They're like, okay, go try to figure out how to live your life with all the things you learned in this controlled environment. And I was traveling around for a while out in India and Nepal, and then I went to California to work for the Forest Service in the mountains. And still this idea of just succumbing to my environment kept coming up because I had to reckon with it. Because I would go back to my habit of exercising in a certain way or seeing my world, my life in a certain way, which just was not conducive to surviving or to living well in my current circumstances. And so that's just kept coming back. And then in Senegal, I was just eating rice. You know, sometimes it would be, they were delicious. These little fish balls with peanut butter, I guess. Yeah, it would be called peanut butter. In little bits of stew, but it was mostly just rice. And it was hot. It was so hot. And people would hide in the shade for most of the day because you would just get sick. And yet for a while, when I first got there, I was completely ignoring that. I'm like, no, I'm going to go sprint. I'm going to go climb this thing. I'm going to do all my push-ups. And they thought it was hilarious. And they continued to think it was all hilarious because they're like, what does she do? You know, she's just like having her own party. Eventually, I slowed down. You know, eventually it got a little bit easier to just stay in the shade in the middle of the day instead of biking like 50 kilometers just because I was feeling antsy and like I hadn't exercised enough, you know. Yeah. Does that answer anything?
Oh my God. Yeah, totally. I think it's so fascinating, your story about being so active and then going into a place in India and then also in Senegal of just quietude and stillness and allowing that to awaken the anxiety that we hold deep within us when we're not able to be still, especially in America, where we have a very Western speed and attention span and have a lot of distractions that we go to cover up the pain or the anxiety or the unresolved trauma in our lives. And I can completely personally relate to that. What, you know, going somewhere and you're supposed to just be sitting still and you're like, I went to, you know, Vipassana, which is a 10-day silent meditation retreat, right? And you're not really allowed to exercise. You're allowed to walk for like a half an hour a day or something like that. They have all these rules and I don't like rules as it is. I know, right? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm so active. Like, how can I not? And what was fascinating is that every day for that half hour, it was like I was pacing around the small area that we could walk in this Vipassana retreat center. It was beautiful. It was open and outdoors and everything. But I felt like I almost like I was in a rat in a maze going over and over again and realizing I was doing all this activity to avoid kind of what was bubbling up, and just had miraculous awakenings during that particular meditation retreat. So you did answer my question. And those of you who are watching on Instagram, I have the voice of the lovely Marina Vernovsky, who is one of the authors in this book, Raise a Vibration, a weekly guide for alchemizing the human experience. and she's one of 52 authors sharing her story of resilience around something she went through. And I don't want to give away your story. I want you to talk about the message you want people to take really from your story. Uh, but you have to obviously read her story in order to get it. But she writes about her time in Senegal in Western Africa and how she's equating her kind of self-worth. That's kind of what I got out of the story. I mean, when I was editing these stories, you guys, was just editing through tears because I was so moved by all of their stories and all the humanity that all of our authors brought and the transparency. When we share our story, we change ourselves because we process our trauma, we process our experience, we own our experience, and then we also allow others to benefit from that. And this uh, very simple task of pulling water from a well became a source of contention around how you're being seen and how you were listening to yourself and the others around you. So I mean, people are like, I don't understand if you haven't read the story, but if you have read the story, I want you to talk to those people who have read the story now and help them understand a little bit more so about what you got out of that and what you wanted your readers to get out of that as well.
Well, I think maybe a critical thing to realize through all of it is this undercurrent of the fact that it was all me. You know, everything was just happening internally. There was no conflict externally. I was just going through my own emotional, psychological adventure. Everyone else was like, is she okay? And then they would just get, they would move on immediately. I don't think they even like noticed that something was wrong. They were like, oh, she's just, going to do her thing over there with that tomato plant.
Elbowing. You taught me that. I didn't know that before.
Oh, armpitting.
Armpitting.
Because yeah.
Wrong body part.
Which is it's such a like uncomfortable thing to call pruning. But so the stalk grows like this, and then the leaves, basically with the branches with the leaves grow this way. And then the suckers grow diagonally in that crevice. So if you catch them early enough, they just come off so easily, and it's so incredibly satisfying. But then
it's called armpitting a tomato plant.
Colloquially, yeah. Okay. I think technically it's just called pruning. It's just another way to prune a tomato plant. But if you let them grow too long, they won't snap off so easily. So you either have to cut them off or just let them do their thing. And then you'll notice if you don't actually do anything to a tomato plant or any other plant, it's not going to be a curated growth, so it'll either get really bushy and just be really messy and have tomatoes hiding in the middle and all over, or it'll get really, really long because you're not pruning it from the top. Anyway, so
the metaphors are endless, right?
Yeah. So that was my point of comfort, I think, when the women were pulling water from the well, were joking around, I took things personally, which happens so easily. You like have the things you're sensitive about or insecure about, the things that you're working so hard to just get over. And then the simplest statement or joke will like turn you into such an insolent child. And that was just I've used this phrase before, it's just my party in that moment. The whole thing was just me trying to figure out how to be okay. And still, that might be the rest of my life or lifetimes, who knows?
For sure.
Just figuring out how to be okay in any context. And even if things aren't like actually okay, so it's okay, so this thing is happening to you. Okay, so then what can you do now? What can you say now? What can you think now to proceed? Because even the most traumatic things don't need to result in, I suppose, with some exceptions, don't need to result in everything just stopping for you. You can take any bit of trauma can be something to consider in your life as you continue from that trauma. It can be something to analyze from different perspectives or to just explore. As traumatizing as it is, all that said, I'm not an expert in psychiatry or psychology, and it's just how I have found to possibly be most helpful with my own trauma, or however I've absorbed whatever's happened in my life. It's just like accepting that it happened, you know, not trying to think of other ways that it could have happened, even though God knows we all do that, right? We're all scene writers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Write a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're, in trying to match your story to a chakra, um, I chose the root chakra for you because in the book, the book is 52 stories from 52 different authors, those of you who don't have the book. And then I've turned it into a weekly guide where you take the author's wisdom that they've shared so beautifully and transparently and courageously to apply that to your own life, and give you journaling prompts and exercises all around that, and great quotes, which I love your quotes. We are now gods, but for the wisdom. I mean, it's beautiful. I chose the root chakra for you because not only is the story obviously initially about your projection of whether or not somebody's questioning your physical strength and how that relates to our physical bodies, our relationship to our physical bodies, but also about what you just said, which is about acceptance. And when we have a connection to accepting our story and accepting whatever the circumstances in the moment, what are we accepting? Are we accepting what we're seeing through our senses, like what we're experiencing through our senses, or are we accepting our interpretation of what is happening? And it's such a tricky thing because whatever our interpretation is of what we go through in life completely dramatically impacts our version of reality. Other people's reality, what we think their reality is, what we think our reality is, what we think the reality is, if that does exist or you think that's existing. So what's fascinating is the root chakra. I mean, at first glance doesn't seem so esoteric, but it is incredibly profound and shapes every single aspect of our lives through a foundational understanding of how we accept things, how we are embracing things that are unfolding in our lives. Do we trust our interpretation? And we only have one interpretation, one truth in the 8 billion or plus or whatever that are out there of people walking the planet. So I think it's a fascinating inquiry into your experience and how we can ask ourselves, like, what am I looking at that I'm projecting onto them that they are thinking this about me? Because this is what we struggle with all the time.
Right. And they couldn't care less, everything was fine for them.
Isn't that the truth though? Most of the time they're not thinking about you. Like, they're not thinking about you.
Yeah, or even if they are, it's not with any malice.
Right.
It's not with any judgment. And maybe especially in that context where I was in this village in southern Senegal, that was such a visual thing. Did it cut out for a second?
Yeah, will you say those last two sentences? Yeah, I was like, hold on. Go ahead, say those last two sentences.
And this is the most important thing. That's profundity you will never have access to. I had this revelation that everything was unconditional on the part of the people around me in that village, which I'm not used to still even. I didn't really grow up with that kind of understanding. My upbringing wasn't, at least in my memory of it, wasn't so unconditional. And that's why I have a hard time trusting that things are unconditional. And that's why I just assume everyone's out to get me at all times. But to really see how generous and welcoming and warm and loving everyone around me was, it was mind-blowing. It was overwhelming. I was like, what do they want from me? What am I supposed to do to express my gratitude? There's nothing, it's stuff.
It's a different way of being. It's not love is transactional. Love is something that we channel and we get to be in that energy and then just share it with everyone else. Or we get to rob ourselves of that experience. And I feel like, when we learn about love in that way, we want to channel it. We want to give it to ourselves first and foremost. And that just happens to spill out into everybody that we connect with.
Yeah. and it's possible to go about to just do that yourself. You can be like that. You totally can be like that.
Mm.
And maybe some might see that as naive or what's the word, like not ambitious or something akin to that. But it doesn't have to be a dangerous perspective, to do things without expecting anything else, to just do things for the sake of doing them, maybe.
I like that you brought that up because I think a lot of people will close off their heart and try not to be loving because they think that it's a liability, that it leaves them open for people to hurt them. But when we're truly in alignment with that energy of love, that's, I mean, our heart chakra, this whole energy here is 60, at least 60 times that. Some people say 100 plus times that, the power of our brain. And when we get the power that's in our hearts and we're letting it come through us first, it doesn't need to be conditional on other people keeping us safe or not inducing pain. Like, pain's still going to come. That's a guarantee in life. We're not going to necessarily be reciprocated through what we offer or how we love. But we are less attached to a result when we channel that kind of vibrational frequency because we're already feeling it. It's overflowing in us rather than coming from a void of loving, kind of like this, like giving. It's like overflowing and letting it go. So you get it first. It's that oxygen mask on you first before giving it to somebody else. You're allowing it to flow through you first. And then you're not coming from that place of need for the other person to provide you with that. You just share it rather than you need to get it from that person. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's not that you are giving something up.
Right.
At the same time. And
yeah.
Humans have
Except
a tendency
maybe
to hoard,
Say that again?
Humans have a tendency to hoard, it seems.
True. I was going to say, I think the thing that you have to give up in that is an egoic posturing of hierarchical, like, comparison or posturing in some way, because coming from the heart, we're always going to have an ego. The ego is not the enemy. It's our vehicle. Like, it's to interpret the world. Like, it's our servant when related to in the most empowering way. But in order to be that flow of energy of love, we have to be in that place of honoring our sovereignty, honoring the sovereignty of each person. And you have to give up that egoic desire to dominate.
Interesting. The domination is interesting. And do you mean in the sense of just having full control at all times over everything?
Well, I think it's really about embracing that we don't control. We can only control what we can control. And so much devastation in relationships. I get to work with a lot of great couples in my coaching practice, and it's about allowing the other person's autonomy to exist, like, so that you can be the pillars holding up the temple rather than trying to dominate one another or trying to change each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. There's this. Anyway, are we running out of time?
I'm sure. I know. I'm sure we could probably talk forever. No, go see what you're gonna share, and then I'll tie us up with one more question I want to ask you. Because this is too much fun.
It is. I was just thinking again about the idea of of creating something and then just relinquishing it because it's not yours anymore. It seems so easy to engage with this pattern of thinking of like, okay, I'm gonna write everything out so that there's no room for the other person to interpret it differently from how I created it or how I wanted it to be interpreted. To control the response and the reaction and the emotions felt by others.
The judgment from others.
Yeah. The judgment, right. It seems like the most, effective way to go about creating something.
I didn't hear you again for about 30 seconds. We start that. Okay. I don't want to miss this out, and I miss out on this, and I don't want anybody who's watching missing out either. Go ahead.
it seems like the most honest thing to do is to relinquish the notion of like that it's your creation once it's created, and letting other people engage with it themselves, whatever it might be, whatever this created entity might be. Instead of creating from your perspective and then creating everyone else's perspectives in the process preemptively. Because I think it might be that our empathy and compassion can only go so far before it all becomes imperious, and dogmatic, and it can get dangerous, or at least scary. It can get scary.
Well, it can cut us off at the ankles too, as far as our progress goes, because if we try and we're focusing on what we simply can't control, then it can start being a weapon rather than a tool against ourselves or our progress, or and I mean, there's so many beautiful aspects to what you're saying right now, because your theme for the chose for the theme of your story, the week of your story, there are 52 stories, 52 weeks of the year, is judgment. And your story title is Unburden, right? Unburden. I mean, if you try and control other people's interpretation of you so much so that becomes your obsession, it's crippling. It's really paralyzing. And I appreciate what you have to say, because I mean, in writing this book and putting it out there, it's a co-creative experience between the authors and the readers. Mm-hmm. And it was a co-creative experience between the authors and me too, putting this together. I mean, if we forget that we're co-creating all the time with other people, we can burden ourselves so much that we just feel we can't even breathe. Mm-hmm. And that's incredibly liberating for me to hear you say. Is like, when you release something, I mean, have a couple albums of music. Once they're done, they're done. You can't change anything. Like, it's out there, even lives, once they're out there, they're out there forever now.
Oh my God.
But like the book too, it's like really, and also it's not just it's good to take responsibility for yourself, right? And try and be as intentional as you can be in your life and what you're saying, how you're communicating, etc. But then you must let go of the bow. Like, you must let the arrow go and go where it goes and be received how it's received. And if you don't, you're going to kill the momentum. You're going to pervert the message. You're going to be burdened. Mm-hmm.
And actually, in archery, one of the tenets is you don't hold on to it for too long, or you're just going to have to restart.
Yeah.
You just have to let it go.
Yeah.
And that's why what's so great, one of the many things that is so great about your book is that there are little, lines on which you can write. There's space to start this kind of adventure of being mindful, and paying attention, being careful, and
I lost you again. Yeah, go back about 20 seconds. Sorry, babe. Like, when you're writing it, being mindful, that's kind of where it cut off. Yeah.
And being careful. And then I started going on about how that kind of thing, even just the small space in which your readers can write their thoughts, or the little images that people can color. I just really want to color your whole book. So
fun.
It's like a wonderful slow foray into slowing one's faculties down a little bit, and to really consider things. And that's it. Yeah.
That's kind of back to where we started this talk today, is like not avoiding what you're experiencing. And when you're reading, don't read just for entertainment. Read for self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-application, because it's all about you. It is all about you. And if you don't make it all about you and understanding how this story applies to you and how you can allow it to transform you, and recognize that you're the center of the universe you're creating, co-creating with other people and whatnot, then we're kind of just drifting along the river with the oars inside the canoe, rather than actively paddling. So I want to ask you too before we tie this up is storytelling is so powerful. I mean, it's what we did before we wrote things down, and it's still done in a way that when we share our hearts with each other, it's how we connect and how we learn and have learn from each other's experience, stand on each other's shoulders, lift other people up. So, in writing your own story, you already shared a little bit of how it was challenging for you because you like to write just for your own experience with the language rather than how it's necessarily being received. And people are going to get so much out of your story. So, I'm grateful that you shifted, with that. Although I think they would get plenty, even if it's Steinbecky
Even if
or
it
whatever
made
you
no
want to
sense.
say. But I love it because it's so simply relatable. What was your experience with writing this as far as processing your own story?
I think it was valuable to write it. I'm very glad I did, and I'm very glad that I wrote it the way I did. And I think that was really only possible because of one of the instructions you provided at the very beginning of this whole process, which was start with an action.
Yeah, start like
And maybe,
mid-action. Yeah.
yeah, because maybe that's how most writers, maybe that's how many people write, but my habit is to start with analysis and to really only have analysis. And that's, and I get stuck in the like muck and the mire of analyzing things and trying to come up with all these grandiose epiphanies and I try to share them with people as if they're ready for them, as if they've been in my brain with me this whole time, which they
Right.
haven't been. So starting with the action, I think, helped me be more honest. And I've used that word a couple times
Mhm.
here, but it
Mhm.
really just what actually happened, regardless of whatever you think happened, what actually happened. And then I was able to use those actions and the event itself to simplify a response, an internal response. So I tried to present this thing that felt so epic for me, at least in retrospect, as I was thinking about this like moment that I wrote about.
Yeah.
But I was just able to make it as simple as possible. And I think that was only possible because of the parameters you gave, which is great.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
know, like it was a challenge, like putting your story in 1,000 words or less, starting in the middle of it, just so people could, so you could encapsulate it in 1,000 words or less. But you're such a beautiful writer, and you have such a intricate and valuable way of seeing things that I do hope that the novel gives the full story because that's what longer works are for, as we go for a whole ride with the author. And I think that that is something that, and I shared this with many of the authors that have written for the book, like, and all of you, like, I hope these mini stories you have all written are prompting you to share more in maybe a longer format or maybe a book of essays. But I mean, there's just such possibility when we're able to allow people in and see us, allow our inner workings to kind of be exposed, where we can realize there's not really that scary world that we are projecting is out there, that this is one moment that probably was like a 10-minute, I don't even know how, it probably wasn't long at all, but this one little nugget of experience that really impacted you and your heart and your ability to receive and give love and know yourself, and be empowered in who you are and what you can and can't do. And we have those little moments all the time, and so I just want to thank you for this delicious conversations, just being able to connect
It was
together.
quite a treat.
I agree. I agree. And I really look forward to next time because I would love to talk to you more. And those who are watching this on Instagram think I'm talking to myself and hopefully are hearing your voice in the background. You can see her beautiful face and the video on YouTube, and then we'll share it on Facebook as well. But if they want to learn more about what you're doing, do you have any sort of public domains, websites, ways that we can? And if you don't,
I
awesome. That's a
don't.
lesson in
I'm so
itself,
sorry.
right? But if people wanna find out more about what you're doing, maybe they just follow through Raise the Vibration. But I wanted to give you that opportunity in case you do want to be seen in that way.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't really have anything. I just have a Facebook account that I use to keep in touch with people from
That you
different
know.
parts of the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So maybe one day, maybe through you for now.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
not.
That absolutely. I'm happy to be that conduit, and I think that that is beautiful in itself of just preserving your experience and the way you love moving through the world. Because I know, I mean, being a sort of a center of a community for better part of 2 decades in New York City, since I moved to Colorado 3 years ago, I've really enjoyed my solitude, despite being a face still and interacting as a spiritual leader and that kind of thing. But I really treasure that solitude as well. So perhaps we have even more lessons coming from Marina of just taking a moment just to be with you and how you're seeing the world, how other than how other people are kind of telling you to interpret it. So that's beautiful.
Right.
Well, I
Right.
adore
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much for
Oh,
this conversation.
thank
My
you.
goodness. Thank you for being a part of this book. Your story is just so beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you to those who are watching and following this process. If you haven't grabbed your copy of the book, go to the website, raisethevibration.com. It's on the shop page. And yeah, it's an incredible tool that you can use whenever you want, or on a weekly basis or a daily basis, to raise your vibration. And we raise the vibration so that we can be more in alignment with what it is we want to create. So thank you, Marina. Thank you, those who are watching. Until next time, keep raising the vibration, everybody.